June 23rd, 1978. I have a copy of Freedom magazine. I think I mentioned it to you before. And if you order that, I'll give you the address. It has a lot of material, more than I need to put on the tape, articles of interest about the spy systems in the United States. Freedom is put out by the Scientologists, but the research, aside from the organization, I don't know much about the Scientology program, except I know their organization is fantastic in the amount of material that they get out about the suppression of our rights. And when they call it freedom, they mean freedom. I have printed for you the information on ordering this magazine. It's $5 for 10 issues. And believe me, it's worth every cent. The address is printed out is 5930 Franklin Avenue, Hollywood, California, 90028. They have an article about the National Security Agency, which has never been properly investigated or exposed. The National Security Agency is separate from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the FBI, of course, and Navy intelligence. It's a body of the spy system that is immune from being investigated by Congress or anybody else. The Supreme Court just ruled this week that National Security Agency does not have to be investigated or release any information on its spying activities. It's described as the largest and most secret member of America's intelligence community. They've been spying on American citizens, the Freedom magazine says, for over 10 years, but they were formed by President Truman, so that's much more than 10 years. They have been into electronic wire snooping, the use of military plans for civil disturbances on how to control people that ride on the streets. They have secret operations which they monitor and involved in private international telephone and communication systems. The program has been under the control of RCA, Global Concern, the ITT, World Communications, and Western Union International, so that every message that you send overseas or send overseas away from the United States is intercepted. And they have printouts where certain words like assassination or murder or certain names are used. And when you use these vocally, these names are printed out in a form, and they transcribe what you're saying as your voice is saying it. You don't have to send letters. They had a secret mail opening overseas, and wires were opened under the code name Shamrock. And this came to light in 1975, October 1975. Freedom has a rundown on National Security Agency, and I think this is important to get the dates of the institutions by which our freedom was taken away from us, like the National Security Council. Last week I talked about the Herbert Hoover Commission to reorganize the executive office. And the Cloak of Secrecy of National Security Agency was founded in 1952. So you see that's much more than 10 years of spying. And they said when President Truman issued an executive order directive establishing him, there was no official announcement anywhere in the United States of the order or the text of the directive, and it's been remaining classified for 23 years. The House Intelligence Committee in 1975 had to issue a subpoena to see that directive because the White House didn't want Congress to have access to it. You see, in 1947, you reorganized the White House with the Pentagon inside the White House, and then the White House can form the National Security Agency, and they're like stepping stones to an apex of power, and the base of it, of course, is all the people that get taken in at the bottom and have to support the weight of these secret organizations. Reading from Freedom, it says there's transcripts of a radio show concerning the French police organization Interpol, which we've spoken about many times, and there are files that are working along with the National Security Agency, and the National Security Agency illegally has been spying for years on the Scientologists. That's why they're writing about it and alerted to it. But they are linked to the Central Intelligence Agency and Interpol and Howard Hughes and Intertel. What is known about the National Security Agency is that there is a top secret. This is what they're saying. The agency is run by the Pentagon, but it's not just under the umbrella of the Pentagon. It's even more secret. It employs 120 100,000 people in the world, and it has an estimated budget of over $10 billion a year. I said one time that our spying budget was about $99 billion a year, and at first it sounded outrageous, but here is an estimated budget of $10 billion a year, and these are the men that are into breaking and intercepting codes and transmitting international messages. But National Security Agency is virtually immune to any single investigation, as supported by the Supreme Court, Nixon-stacked Supreme Court. Of course, we can confirm this, that NSA is virtually immune to any investigation by other branches of government. A special law was passed by Congress in 1959, another link in the chain of repressions in this country, that provided that there will be no legal requirement for the disclosure of the organization of the National Security Agency or any of the names, the titles, the salaries, or the numbers of persons employed by that agency. Therefore, you may get books by an agent on codes, you may get newspaper articles by these agents. They have a budget of $10 billion, and yet a law was provided in 1959, confirmed by the Supreme Court this week, that they have no legal basis, nobody has a legal basis to say, are you an agent of the National Security Agency? It is a criminal offense to publish any of the National Security Agency secrets. Until the 1975 investigations of the agencies, at the time Senator Church began investigating them, there had never been any congressional committee to probe National Security Agency activities, and no law that would prohibit NSA from engaging in domestic surveillance. While there's a law that we know is completely thrown out the window, the CIA and the police departments and the postal offices, they've infiltrated every branch of the United States government and every political party illegally, and they haven't been prosecuted for that. Yet there's absolutely no law to prohibit the National Security Agency from working in the United States, and therefore under that cloak, the spying still continues on the various citizens of the United States. You can read that resume from Freedom. In that issue, the same issue of the paper, there's a copy of a report, Part 1, by Richard Weiland, and the original documents were sent to me this week from Los Angeles, from Vaughn Young down in Los Angeles. It's called The Secret Report Reveals the Panama Death Plot. This is in this issue of Freedom, but this is an important article because of the links of the Intertel organization, the CIA, and organized crime, and the fact that the Drug Enforcement Agency is just one more extension of that. You see, when you get Interpol and Intertel and DEA and NSA and Hughes and ITT and RCA, all of these corporates have a network that closes in and can keep track of what we do, assassinate people they don't want, plant evidence on other people, and they are all interlocked through many, many documents and through the research of a few dedicated people. In this case again, the Scientologists are responsible for these exposés. When I see so much of the work that they're doing in bringing out the truth of the people who are denying us our freedoms, I sometimes wonder why Scientologists are locked up or in prison or their offices are raided. And the answer is quite clear, that they're trying to tell us something. And I don't think there's enough people in America appreciating what they're doing or subscribing to what they're saying. In this article, and they have a document that they refer to as the DFAO report. The author is Michael A., capital D-E, capital F-E-O. He said a high-ranking official of the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, plotted the assassination of the head of Panama Intelligence. According to this secret report that has just been released, Michael A. DeFeo wrote the report. It was sent to the Attorney General June 18, 1975. That was 3 years after the arrest at the Watergate, and a request to investigate the allegations of fraud, irregularity, and misconduct in the drug enforcement agencies. And it has been kept secret, this report, for nearly 3 years until it was released by Freedom newspaper, magazine, and the Scientologists. The report charges the Drug Enforcement Agency had ties with International Intelligence Incorporated, which is Intertel, the party that had been, in quotes, in charge of Howard Hughes' body until he died, but actually kept this unknown person, allegedly, I believe it's Vance Cooper, up in the room drugged. Intertel played that hoax on us and should be broken or exposed for that. But Intertel had strong links with Howard Hughes, despite the Drug Enforcement Agency report that the private detective firm also had associations with organized crime. They have questionable links to the CIA versus the training of their agents and the hiring of CIA employees. Since 1972, with the arrival of a former CIA operative whose Drug Enforcement Agency staff of 19 included 14 formerly of the CIA, we didn't get so much breaking open of the Drug Enforcement Agency. It was after the Watergate that the links of the CIA to DEA began to come open. The Drug Enforcement agents used both the Howard Hughes empire, money from the Super Corporation, and CIA money to gamble in casinos in Las Vegas and Nevada to cover their expenses. This report of Michael Defoe states that the Senate committee investigated charges that the acting DEA chief inspector, whose name is Philip Smith, and his assistant administrator for enforcement, William Durkin, participated in discussions with the Drug Enforcement Agency in which they were going to assassinate the president of Panama, who they suspected of being involved in drug trafficking. I wrote about the plans to assassinate the president of Panama in 1972 in my first Watergate story. Smith said he was informed that the plot had been verified and then neutralized. There was also discussion about the possibility of killing Manuel Noriega, the principal assistant to the president of Panama and the head of the intelligence, and that Smith and Durkin actually proposed that he be killed. It's interesting that the proposals to kill the head of the drug traffic in Panama and the president came at a time just when the Watergate story was breaking, and I guess their lives were spared on that. Connections to Intertel stemmed primarily from Mr. Smith, who had been approached for employment by a private detective agency linked with Howard Hughes Suma Corporation. He was given a trip to NASA, stayed at a hotel that is a client of Intertel, which is synonymous with Howard Hughes. Smith arranged in April of 1973 for their agents to receive $20,000 from Suma Corporation for gambling purposes at a Howard Hughes hotel, and the money would be handled by the head of Intertel, Robert Pelican, who used to be one of the chiefs in the Justice Department before he came into Intertel, and he still keeps many of his agents and contacts inside the Justice Department. In July of 1972, this is just 1 month after the Watergate arrest, the Drug Enforcement Agency official wrote a report about intelligence information they had about possible ties between organized crime and Intertel. That's the Howard Hughes organization and Intertel, but that report was never filed, and the Drug Enforcement agents continued with their gambling in the Howard Hughes casinos in Las Vegas and Nevada. And the links of the Justice Department, the Drug Enforcement agents, the assassination teams, the traffic of narcotics is confirmed over and over again in many kinds of reports. This is just one more. In 1974, Operation Croupier was initiated with the idea, in quotes, of investigating drug smuggling in NASA, but was arranged with Mr. Conine, who is supervising Drug Enforcement Agency, who is identified in the Pentagon Papers as the CIA operative in Vietnam, active in the overthrow of the Diem regime. So you see that Mr. Conine, who was active in the drug traffic in Southeast Asia, I have mentioned his name in the Ajax files, also put out by the Scientologists. Mr. Conine works with assassination teams and drug agents, and they could be using the excuse of a drug enforcement agency doing their work to continue assassinating people that they want to knock off, to take over a country, or more important probably, to take over the gambling and the drug traffic, because that's a pretty big business too. It pays more than working for the Justice Department. In 1975, 36 out of 332 employees of the Drug Enforcement Agency are from the CIA, formerly of the CIA. Conine has a staff of 19 individuals. 14 of them are former CIA employees. Here's a man who works with the Drug Enforcement Agency now, part of the assassination teams linked to the murder of DM, and goodness knows how many other people, if we really could investigate all this, who is taking people from the CIA and putting them in drug enforcement. When Mr. Colby came in the CIA, there was supposed to be a large amount of dismantling of the machinery. Also, when Mr. Schlesinger took over, a lot of men, in quotes, were fired. They were just released to cover their ass in case their name came up at Watergate or other investigations probably, and then were put in these more important jobs, which was a move up instead of down. Robert Feldkamp, Drug Enforcement Agent Director of Public Affairs, said the agency has hired many CIA intelligence analyst investigators. There are now 65 to 70 former CIA employees working in the Drug Enforcement Agency. And Mr. Conine worked with Mr. James P. Muldoon, who represented Security Consultants International and the Central Investigation Agencies, where they established safe houses that could be run by Mr. Conine, and Muldoon and Conine worked in Vietnam together, both as part of the CIA. Muldoon has sold Conine nearly $5,000 in surveillance equipment from B.R. Fox Laboratories in Alexandria, Virginia. What this article doesn't say in Freedom is that Mr. Fox also makes weapons and silencers and assassination tools. It does go on, I'm sorry, and says that what they called explosives, what Conine calls explosives that he buys from this laboratory, are also assassination devices. So the assassination teams haven't broken up, and they're still operating. The Senate hearings on the DeFeo report that were supposed to come out making the links of organized crime, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Summa Corporation, and Howard Hughes were held behind closed doors, and none of the proceedings were ever released to the public. That's why you're probably hearing about this report for the first time. And for those of you that take the tape, if you want me to copy them and sell them at cost to you, I will. I haven't figured out how many pages they are of this report of Michael DeFeo, but I have it here and I can copy it if you want it, and I'll let you know next week what it comes to. Those of you that have the Ajax file may want this file, because there's been a massive cover-up all this time on the links of these organizations. If too many people make the connections, maybe the Drug Enforcement Agency would have to explain why there's so many CIA people working for them. But as yet, there are not enough people making these connections, and so they can get away with silencing these reports. The Freedom issue also asks the Holocaust, could it reoccur? And it goes into the origin of the Catholic Church being repressed, as well as the Jews and the Protestants and the Gypsies, and it tells the danger that Adolf Hitler had when his Third Reich became the church. And a lot of people think of Adolf Hitler in terms of just repressing Jews in concentration camps and Gypsies, but there's an article in this issue of Freedom that says that the Reich Church was to be the only church, and Adolf Hitler wanted to abandon, of course, the entire Old Testament and revise the New Testament. And he made resolutions in Nazi Germany that required all pastors to take an oath of office of allegiance to Adolf Hitler. He said about Protestants, in quote, "You can do anything you want with them, they'll all submit. They are insignificant little people, submissive as dogs, and they sweat with embarrassment when you talk to them," end quote. One of the first pastors to be arrested in Germany was a pastor, Niemöller. He was arrested in July in 1937 and taken to prison. 870 other pastors were arrested and taken to prison. The orators were on the church pulpit route were supposed to talk about Mein Kampf, and the only book that was placed on the altar was a copy of Mein Kampf, and they were to remove all Christian crosses from the churches, cathedrals, or chapels. I'm bringing this up because a lot of people think that my disgust of Nazism has to do with just Adolf Hitler's attitude toward the Jews. One of the big problems in this country is that the Gentile has not been educated as to what Adolf Hitler means. They shrug their shoulder, oh, just Jew or black, how does that affect me? But they haven't really read the accounts of what went on in Germany that affected all the people, or they would have a different attitude. Catholic publications were suppressed, and the Reich Church was the only legal church in Nazi Germany, and its symbol was a swastika. By 1939, the pogroms escalated. The Jews had to wear the Star of David to identify them publicly, and then, of course, the large concentration camps were built for genocide, but they, as I say, they didn't hold just Jews. There were many good Jews that went into this. At the end of the war, according to this article on Nazis in the Freedom issue, many of the SS officers in charge of the killings vanished. Some reappeared later, with new identities as members of French international police organization Interpol, which I keep stressing because Interpol and Intertel and Howard Hughes and ITT and the Nazi connections are there today. Simon Wiesenthal compared the Interpol operations with the tactics of the Gestapo in Germany. They have files on everybody. The Gestapo would blackmail these people and press them to vote for them. I bring this up now because I think of Joseph Montoya, a member of the Senate Watergate Committee who just died last week, a week and a half ago at the age of 62. Joseph Montoya was from New Mexico. He was a Democrat, and he was very weak. If you read the questions on the Watergate hearings, and I have the hearings here, his questions were weak. He sat there like a dummy, like he was doped, and he let the chance to ask questions that would open up the Watergate story completely pass him by. Of course, we do have Mr. William Colby's report that every member of the Senate Select Committee was under the control of the CIA before the Senate began. But to show you how Interpol blackmails, how the Nazis blackmail, and J. Edgar Hoover, as vice president of Interpol, was a master blackmailer of all time. There's a quotation of Mr. Montoya. It's in the New York Times. He said, he was alleged to have said in 1970 in his election campaign to the Senate, in quote, "The way to succeed in politics is by talking to the people and voting for the special interests." He had always been accused of being a tool of the special interests. By 1976, his name was brought up with scandals regarding a shopping center he owned in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there were allegations by the Internal Revenue when they went into his budget that he had been given some special treatment regarding his tax returns. You see, 1973-74, he covers up the investigation of the Watergate. And what did they have on Mr. Montoya? A little scandal. There were even talks that he was linked to the mafia, and that he had this shopping center, and that the IRS would go easy on him, of course, if he would go along with the Watergate Committee. Mr. Montoya, in quotes, was said to be a millionaire. He was briefly in the news last year when a federal indictment against Tong-Sun Park, the South Korean businessman, involved in alleged attempts by Seoul to buy influence in the United States Senate, asserted that the New Mexican, Joseph Montoya, was one of the American politicians whose election campaign Mr. Parks had supported. You see, Congress is run and the Senate is investigated, just like the House Select Committee members, on what you have on people. You get these committees going and you make sure that you have the goods on them so that you don't get honest investigations, and this is one way to control them. There's an article this week about Sun Myung-moon leaving the United States and running off to London because he was supposed to testify regarding the South Korean intelligence money going to Mr. Moon. But I want to share this with you in case you didn't see it. It was an AP story, June the 7th, and it was covered in other stories around the country. But the connivance of Mr. Moon at the height of Watergate to protect President Nixon, to have demonstrations on the street, rallies in New York City, to protest the unfair treatment that our politicians who are crooks are getting, is paid. It's recycled money from the CIA back to the Korean CIA and back to this country. And it's important that these pieces be put together because not only is Sun Moon running away from answering questions about his links to the Korean CIA and bribing of our congressmen, but because of the allegations that he again is tied to Adolf Hitler's money and the money that is used to spread his so-called Christian movement, which is really a front for this gunpowder manufacturer, taking the young people of America and diverting them from the serious studies that they have to do. Reverend Moon was, in quotes, on at least one occasion receiving Korean Central Intelligence Agency money. According to the report, Mr. Moon left the United States for London just this last week, shortly before the House International Relations Subcommittee tried to subpoena him to testify. They said, in quotes, they didn't know if he was evading the subpoena, but by coincidence he was supposed to be called on Tuesday, and he scrammed out of the country. Reverend Moon had truckloads of followers brought to Washington for one of his famous demonstrations in September 1974. He was supposed to have them there. They were chased out of town, I believe, at the time, and it was called off. But he was got orders from Seoul in South Korea to stage a demonstration, and the Korean agencies gave him money, according to one defector, for him to have these demonstrations. And they arranged for his demonstration September 14th, 1974. This was money coming from South Korea. He was supposed to have demonstrations against Japan's lack of cooperation in finding out who killed the wife of South Korean President Park Chung-hee. But I'm sure that South Korean President Park Chung-hee could find out who killed his wife without having demonstrations in America. This was at a time when Reverend Moon was prominent in defending Richard Nixon. In quotes, the New York Times said the KCIA, that's the Korean CIA, had used Reverend Moon and members of his Unification Church to stage rallies in the United States in support of the Korean government, their policies and aims, and at least one occasion he got funds for that purpose, at least one occasion. As I say, Reverend Moon has flipped out of here. He's gone away. I don't know how soon he'll be back to testify, but when we break the secret of Reverend Moon, we'll know more about the Christian movement that's going on in this country with influencing the minds of young people and their links to the Korean CIA and the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. In addition to buying off congressmen through CIA money and KCIA money, there's a wonderful business in the United States now called public relations offices. There's a article by Andrea Frischman and Alan White, Richard Allen White, that was in the Los Angeles Times a few weeks ago, called The Selling of Argentina. Madison Avenue packages repression. We not only package Reverend Moon to hide the crimes of the President of the United States or the Vice President and to take these young people away from what they should be doing, which is specifically studying American history, but this article talks about New York Madison Avenue offices that represent dictators to sell them to us at home. So as we sit over our beer and watch the news and read newspapers, we'll feel kindly towards these people. This article goes into the PR firm of Reuter and Finn that handles the Shah of Iran, and Doremus and Company also handle them. The Philippine Central Bank is another one of their clients, and Egypt and Saudi Arabia are representative. Mr. Ruda's interest was promoted in this firm by Michael Moynihan and Associates and Company, headed by the brother of Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York. Marion Javits, the wife of Senator Jacob Javits, worked with Reuter and Finn's accounts for the Shah of Iran. The foreign governments, the article states, have to use public relations offices to sell countries, and now the one that's currently selling you Argentine is called Burson Mart Seller, a major New York advertising agency with offices in Los Angeles, Chicago, and other countries. It is known in Madison Avenue as the BM Agency, and I call it the BM Agency too. We can give it the same name. I agree, it's the BM. In 1976, the head of the Argentine government, General George Videla, became worried about the impact of his military dictatorship on public opinion. I'm reading to you from the Los Angeles Times and a report from Amnesty International about the BM public relation firms. It said that the Argentine strongman was upset. He had to sell his country and put the minds of the world to rest about his country. And there was a memo from Burson Marsteller, that's the BM publicity agency, to the Argentine government, which Amnesty International got. They won a 1977 Nobel Peace Prize for this report. It's a 33-page document. And it said, certainly in the 2 years since the military coup brought Videla to power, the world press has been critical of mass repression and the violation of human rights in Argentina. At least 15,000 men and women and children have disappeared. 8,000 to 10,000 are currently in prison. Many are subjected to brutal torture and detention without charge or trial. The Argentine Anti-Communist Association is a far-right terrorist group. It's Nazi with anti-Semitic leanings. And the job of the public relations group is to soften the terrorism and do a report so that the repression doesn't go around the world. They said it influences the press to have this kind of report going out, and they have a detailed account of what to do about this kind of bad press. They were to go to bankers, commercial interests, travel agents, and reporters, and they invited reporters down to Argentina to examine the country to make sure that everything is really going fine down there. And Martzeller invited 30 to 40 VIP of the press, and Madison Avenue is in the business of selling you military dictatorships from Iran, Brazil, Argentine, all over the world where the rights of people do not exist.